I never thought that I would completely lose my hearing at the age of 66, but that's exactly what happened to me 4 months ago after a severe infection. My name is Ariana, and this whole nightmare started the day I woke up in a hospital room, immersed in ringing silence. I didn't hear anything, not the noise of the corridors, not the muffled hum of voices, not the click of heels on the tiled floor. All the sounds disappeared, faded away, leaving me in a frightening void. I didn't even have anyone to talk to. My daughter Rachel and I have not spoken for many years, ever since my husband, her father, died. This story still makes me seethe with anger. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Rachel showed up at my house just a few days after the funeral, bringing with her neither sympathy nor warm words. Instead, she demanded that I sell our family home and give her half of the inheritance. I looked at her, shocked, not believing that my child, flesh of the flesh, could be so cold. Rachel, I began, struggling to find the words. Your father left everything to me in his will. But you're the only heir. You'll get everything when I'm gone. Why are you in a hurry? It's not fair. She shouted, clenching her fists. I have a family. I can't just sit around and wait for you to die. Those words cut through my heart like a knife. I remember how she stormed out of the house, slamming the door, and from that day on, our lives went our separate ways. She lived with her husband David and their children in a rented apartment somewhere, and I stayed in the house where I spent 40 years with her father. And then the disease came. She struck suddenly, with fever, weakness, and tinnitus. They took me to the hospital, injected me with antibiotics, and conducted endless tests. And then one morning I woke up and realized that I couldn't hear anything. I was lying in a hospital room, feeling more alone than ever before. And suddenly, Rachel. She was standing in the doorway, holding a notebook in her hands. Her face was tense, her lips pursed. She wrote something and handed me a page. Mom, you need someone to take care of you. Let me help you. Please. I don't know if it was medication, exhaustion, or simple loneliness, but I nodded. Before I could realize my decision, Rachel and her entire family, her husband David, their 18-year-old daughter Mimi and 14-year-old Ignacia moved into my house. I even gave Rachel access to my bank account so she could pay bills and make purchases. It seemed reasonable, because I didn't hear anything else, and dealing with stores and payments became a real challenge. The first few weeks were strange, but Rachel kept her word. She got up early, cooked breakfast, cleaned, and kept the house in order. She took me to doctor's appointments, helped me explain to them. They wrote in notebooks. I answered, perhaps too loudly, but no one complained. And then one day, at the next appointment, the doctor conducted tests for a long time, then bent down and wrote something down. I'm sorry, Mrs. Champolly, but a hearing aid won't help you. We need to find out the cause of your deafness before we can do anything about it. I clutched my notebook, reading those words over and over again. The doctor waited, Rachel looked at me, and I felt the darkness shrink around me. I must have stared at this note for 5 whole minutes. I couldn't wrap my head around what I'd read. Deafness was a diagnosis that sounded like a sentence to me. Rachel had to pat me lightly on the shoulder to get my attention. I shuddered, as if I had woken up from a bad dream, and met her worried gaze. She was probably afraid of how I would take it, but what could I say? It felt like someone had slammed a door in my face. A blind, thick door that left my whole old life behind. At home, we began to get used to a new way of communicating. The family wrote me notes about everything, about what they wanted for dinner when they left the house, or if someone called. I answered as best I could, trying to speak loudly and clearly so that I could be heard. It was uncomfortable, imperfect, but we managed. My granddaughter Mimi has become a real blessing. She noticed how bored I was getting, and one day she appeared in my room with a tablet in her hands. She sat down next to me and, smiling, handed me a note. Grandma, let me show you some cool apps. I think you'll like it. At first, I was skeptical about this. It seemed too late to learn new things. But Mimi patiently explained, showed me how to download books, how to play simple games, and how to watch movies with subtitles. Her energy and kindness warmed me up. We spent long evenings together, and perhaps for the first time in recent months, I felt like I was part of something real. But the usual way of life was crumbling anyway. I had to quit college. A decision that was harder for me than I could have expected. I didn't teach literature for the sake of money. Ignazio's legacy provided me with a comfortable old age. I did this because I loved standing in front of an audience, and I loved seeing students' faces light up when complex thoughts reach them, as they argue, search, and think. It was this feeling of being needed, of being in dialogue, that made me get up in the morning. But how could I teach if I couldn't hear? How to conduct discussions, how to answer questions, how to understand that one of the students is experiencing difficulties. I tried to convince myself that I could handle it. That I could somehow get out, that I could lip read, find another way. But deep down, I knew, impossible. And I had to put up with it. My days have changed. I spent them reading both printed books and electronic ones, which Mimi helped me download. The internet has opened up a new world for me. I visited websites about things I hadn't even thought about before, and even joined several online book clubs where everything was written, not said. Living in silence has taught me to notice things that used to slip away. I was sitting in my old armchair by the window, watching how my family lived, how their days passed. I saw Rachel and David cooking breakfast together. How they stood close to each other, talking, laughing. Sometimes Rachel would touch his arm lightly, and he would smile at her, the way Ignazio used to smile at me. When I caught their eyes, they waved at me, smiled warmly, and I tried to smile back. The grandchildren have also found their rhythms. Mimi spent most of her time in her room, working on photo projects or studying for exams. Ignazio settled into the basement, immersed in his video games, and appeared upstairs only to eat or when Rachel called him. Everything looked so normal. So perfect. But the silence taught me to notice what was hidden beneath the surface. I began to see the moments that I had missed before. For example, one day, when I entered the kitchen to make myself tea, Rachel and David were having what seemed to me to be a tense conversation. Their gestures were sharp, and their faces were focused. David looked down, and Rachel nervously ran her hand through her hair. When they saw me, they both smiled broadly. Too wide. Their eyes met above my head, and it made my stomach clench. It was a quick glance, but I caught something disturbing in it, some kind of unspoken agreement that made me uneasy. I tried to convince myself that it was all a figment of my imagination. After all, why would they behave like that? Rachel took care of me. She cooked my favorite dishes, kept the house in order, and monitored my medications. David fixed things around the house, installed new safety devices in the bathroom so that I wouldn't fall. They were both there when I had to go to the doctor, patiently sitting with me in the boring corridors. Why did I suddenly start to doubt their sincerity? But those glances, those smiles that didn't reach my eyes. They clung to me like a thistle. Their faces changed when they thought I wasn't looking. Quick, almost imperceptible glances when I asked them to write something down for me. Knowing grins as I passed by. Stop it, I told myself. You're just nervous. You're upset. You're making up conspiracies because you can't accept silence. I told myself that it was just my perception. They are my family. They love me. As the weeks passed, I continued to doubt. Was that laugh really about me? Did the whispering stop because I entered the room? Or was it just my imagination? These thoughts tormented me at night, and every time I convinced myself that it was just a fear born of loneliness and silence. And then that morning came. It was about 6 o'clock, and I was sleeping soundly, as it often happens before dawn, when dreams get confused and drag themselves along. But suddenly something woke me up. At first, I couldn't figure out what. I lay there, disoriented, and listened to the silence. And then I heard the hum of a car horn. He burst into my world like a punch. Loud, sharp. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding. Pulling on my robe as I went, I rushed to the window, ready to say everything I thought about the impudent driver who had disturbed my peace of mind. But she stopped. I heard the beep. I could hear the birds chirping outside the window. I could hear the old heating system making its usual low hum. I could hear the floorboards creaking under my feet. My hearing has returned. After 4 months of silence, I could hear again. My heart was pounding in my chest. I froze, afraid to move, afraid that this was some kind of strange deception, that any movement would bring me back to the void. But no. I heard. And it was a miracle. I stood listening, like a man opening his eyes for the first time. And with all the excitement and fear, with trembling hands, I finally moved to the door. I should have told you. I had to share this miracle. I went down the stairs, and when I was halfway down, I heard voices from the living room. Rachel and David. They were talking quietly, but I could hear every word. "I'm so tired of all this," David's voice was trembling with irritation. "How much longer do we have to pretend? Pretend that we care about your mother? Act like we're one big happy family. I'm tired of tiptoeing around this old woman. When will she finally die?" The world around me froze. I gripped the railing so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I heard every word. But what happened next turned out to be even scarier. "Just be patient," Rachel replied. I could hear the smile in her voice. "It won't be long. As you can see, she's already lost her hearing. And this is the first sign of decline. As soon as old people start to lose their abilities, they quickly give up. She will wither away. It's just a matter of time." The world tilted. I had to sit down right on the stairs because my legs wouldn't hold up. My daughter. My own flesh and blood. She sat there and calmly discussed my death. I thought about those looks, those smiles, the tension in their voices. I wasn't being paranoid. I didn't make it up. Everything was real. And, oddly enough, that wasn't the scariest thing. No. The scariest thing was the realization that they were waiting. They were waiting for my death as a deliverance. It took all my strength not to break down right there. I stood up. She straightened her robe. She took a deep breath to hide her trembling. And slowly, as if nothing had happened, she descended the remaining steps. When I entered the living room, I realized that my steps were heavy. After all, a deaf person doesn't know to walk quietly. I gave them a big smile, as I'd gotten used to over the past 4 months, and practically shouted, "Good morning. What a beautiful day." They shuddered, looked at each other in fright, but almost immediately regained their composure. Rachel gave me that fake, forced smile that I now knew all too well. David nodded briskly, his face beaming with friendliness, but I could see his jaw twitching tensely. God, I never noticed this theater before. How long they played their roles, and I sat in the audience, blind and deaf, applauding. That same day, I pulled my old phone out of the drawer and studied for a long time how to use it as a voice recorder. I still didn't know what I was going to do with these recordings. But I knew one thing: I needed proof. I didn't trust anyone else except silence and the device's mechanical memory. From that day on, every morning I hid my phone in the pocket of my house dress, allowing it to record everything I heard. Everything they thought I couldn't hear. What I heard over the next few days made me sick. It wasn't just Rachel and David. Even Ignacio was involved. One day, he came home after school, threw his backpack on the floor, and as he passed me, he asked loudly, "Hey, is the deaf old lady still alive?" Rachel and David laughed. The laughter was loud, open, and real. The way they never laughed around me. Yes, my son, David grinned. Unfortunately, she's still kicking. She's so annoying, Ignacio added, rolling his eyes. Everything needs to be recorded, everything needs to be shown with gestures. It's infuriating. Why can't she figure things out on her own? And then, as if nothing had happened, they became my caring relatives again. There were those gentle, patient smiles again. More notes. Mom, are you comfortable? Would you like a cup of tea? Do you need help? All those sweet words written in an even handwriting were as deceitful as their smiles. And there was one thing behind it all. They were waiting. They were waiting for my death. Only one soul in this house was real. Only one was not wearing a mask. Thank God for Mimi. In the midst of all this ugliness, her kindness remained pure. I heard it in her voice, saw it in her eyes, felt it in her every move. Every few days, she would knock on my door, clutching a new book to her chest. Grandma, she wrote in her notebook. I saw this in a bookstore and thought of you. It's about a woman who traveled through Europe in the 1920s. I know you like historical stories. And she was right. I loved them. I loved reading about women who lived bravely, who were not afraid of the world, no matter how cruel it was. And I loved that Mimi remembered me. That she really knew what I liked. It wasn't the kind of pretense her mother fed me. It was a real concern. Mimi could sit with me for hours. I was showing my photos on my laptop. Each image was special. She had a talent for seeing more than just faces and objects. She caught the moments that told the stories. I could hear her voice when she explained to me exactly what she wanted to show. I heard her sincerity, her passion. And all the while, I kept pretending. I read her notes, answered loudly, as I used to. And every time I lied, my heart broke. Because I didn't want to lie to Mimi. The only honest person in this house. But I couldn't take any chances. I couldn't let anyone know that my hearing had returned. And then there was that evening. I was sitting in my room when I heard voices in the hallway. Mimi and Rachel. Mom, you need to stop talking about Grandma like that, Mimi said. Her voice was firm, filled with barely contained anger. She deserves better. She's not just some kind of burden that we're waiting to get rid of. I held my breath. Rachel sighed heavily, and I could hear the weariness and irritation in her voice. Mind your own business. Go to your room and stop meddling in things that don't concern you. But it concerns me, Mimi persisted. She's my grandmother. She's a human being, Mom. Have you forgotten? Rachel's voice became harsh. These are adult matters. You don't understand anything yet. I understand enough, Mimi replied stubbornly. And I hate hearing you talk about her. Silence, heavy as lead, fell between them. I heard Mimi's footsteps recede down the hall, and her door slammed shut. And I heard Rachel sigh, tired and annoyed, as if this conversation had exhausted her. I heard Mimi coming out of the house through the window. Her footsteps were heavy, full of teenage resentment. I walked slowly to the window and saw her walking towards the garden bench, the one she always ran to when she was upset. She sat down, hugging herself, and wiped the tears from her eyes. I stood there looking at her, and I wanted to run out, hug her, tell her how proud I was of her. How grateful I am for her protection, for the steadfastness she showed by standing by my side. I wanted to say that she is the light in my house full of shadows. But I couldn't. I couldn't yet. It's strange how Mimi turned out to be so different from her mother. Where Rachel was calculating and cold, Mimi was warm and sincere. Where Rachel saw me as a burden, an inconvenience that needed to be eliminated, Mimi saw a person. A person who needs to be cherished, protected, and respected. Sometimes I found myself studying Mimi's face, trying to see in her the kind woman Rachel had once been. The woman I remember before greed poisoned her heart. Mimi's presence made my situation a little more bearable. Yes, I lived in a house among people who were waiting for my death. But at least I had one ally. One person who didn't consider me just a source of inheritance. One person who really cared. But even that couldn't lessen the horror that each new record brought. It's amazing how people can talk about anything if they think no one is listening. I was sitting in my usual armchair in the living room, pretending to be engrossed in a book, when Rachel and David started talking about money. My money. So how much did you manage to get out? David asked casually, as if discussing the weather. He was sprawled out on the couch with his feet up on my coffee table, swinging them casually. Rachel was flipping through some papers, and I didn't have to guess what it was. My bank statements. About 25,000 at the moment, she replied. I almost dropped the book, but I held it in time, forcing my hands not to shake. $25,000. They stole $25,000 from me. You're too careful, David chuckled. Come on, Rachel, be more aggressive. This old bag has more money than she knows what to do with. She won't even notice if you take twice as much. I slowly turned the page, feigning indifference, but inside I was trembling. It's not that easy, Rachel said irritably. Mom has notifications on her account about large withdrawals and transfers. If I exceed the limit, she will receive a notification. She may be deaf, but unfortunately she is not blind. We need to be careful. David sighed heavily. It's a pity she's not blind, he said, grinning. It would be much easier. My fingers curled into a fist under the fabric of my dress. They didn't just want me dead. They wanted me to turn into a feeble being, full of weakness and helplessness. I wondered if there was a limit to their cruelty. Later that day, I adjusted to their trust again. I was pretending to doze off in a chair near the kitchen when I heard them talking again. The tape recorder in his pocket was listening to their every word. I noticed you were buying these gorgeous organic steaks, David said, displeasure evident in his voice. An expensive wine. Isn't it too posh for your mother? Rachel laughed her cold, ringing laugh. The one that sounded like glass falling on a stone floor. Please, she said. I buy the best for us. And her? I'll give you the cheapest I can find. Discounted meat, generic brands, everything on sale. She won't know the difference anyway. She's so grateful that someone just cooks for her. I could feel their eyes on me when they turned to me. I pretended to be asleep, lowering my head and relaxing my arms. And they started laughing again. Without even trying to be quieter. Why hide if you think there's a deaf woman nearby? Look at her, Rachel giggled. Sleeping like a baby. She has no idea that we're eating steaks and she's a cut-price mince. At least she's eating something, David said, barely able to contain his laughter. Better than she deserves. They were laughing. They were laughing at me. Over his mother-in-law. A woman who gave them her house, her trust, her money. I sat in this chair, feeling everything inside me burning with humiliation and pain. I dreamed of jumping up, screaming, and throwing them out of my house. But I knew it would be too easy for them. I tried to breathe evenly. My face remained calm, even though everything inside me was twisted with disgust. The worst part wasn't even the money. Not cheap food, not stealing, and not cheating. It was worse to hear the glee in their voices as they discussed how easily they could take advantage of me. It wasn't desperation. No need. They enjoyed it. They had fun making a fool of the deaf old lady who opened the doors of her house for them. 3 weeks before my birthday, Rachel handed me a note at breakfast. Her handwriting was neat, as if she had carefully thought out every letter. Mom, I want to throw you a big birthday party. We will invite all your friends and relatives. You deserve to be honored. I smiled and nodded enthusiastically, shouting back the way I've gotten used to over the past few months. That sounds great, honey. How thoughtful of you. But now I knew better. It wasn't a concern or a desire to honor me. It was a show. A performance in which Rachel wanted to look like a devoted daughter. Perhaps she wanted everyone to see how selflessly she takes care of her sick mother. Or maybe it was an opportunity to demonstrate what a burden I am and how nobly she carries this cross. Preparations began immediately. Rachel spent days on the phone, inviting guests, coordinating the delivery, discussing the menu. I've heard every word of these conversations, clearly and acutely now. She ordered expensive catering, hired decorators, and even invited a professional photographer. Nothing but the best for her dear old mom's birthday. And then the day of the party came. The house was filled with relatives and old friends whom I hadn't seen in years. There was awkwardness in their gazes. Someone was silently writing me notes, trying to do everything right. Someone was trying to speak louder, as if forgetting that I was lip-reading. They tried. I saw it. Rachel was fluttering around the house like an ideal hostess, like the epitome of virtue and caring. "Mom is my inspiration," she said in that husky voice, almost breaking from false emotions. "Taking care of her is not a burden, but a privilege. After all she's done for me, it's the least I can do." And everyone was nodding and smiling sympathetically. I sat in my place of honor like a statue, holding back my real thoughts, hiding my pain behind a polite smile. She nodded, raised a cup of tea, and gratefully shook hands. Play the role of a grateful, deaf, old mother. Inside, I was just counting down the minutes to the end of this farce. And then the slideshow started. Ignazio dimmed the lights, and the pictures flashed on the wall, carefully selected and adjusted, like the whole performance. In the first photo, Rachel was helping me in the garden, smiling with that fake warmth I now knew all too well. The next one showed David supposedly reading a book to me, even though I knew for a fact that he had never done that. On the other, I'm on the porch, surrounded by Ignazio and Mimi, as if our family was really filled with care and love. There was a sentimental caption attached to each photo. "Love knows no boundaries, family is everything, bonds that will not break." I heard one of the guests sob softly. I saw Patricia, my cousin, wiping her eyes, whispering how touching it was to see such devotion. Martha, my old college friend, gently stroked Rachel's hand and admiringly told her what a wonderful daughter she was. The slideshow is over. The last photo is of us all together, hugging, smiling like a perfect, loving family. The words flashed on the screen, "We love you, Grandma." And that's when I realized. I've had enough. I stood up. Slowly but surely, she got to her feet. There was silence in the hall. I saw Rachel glance at David. The smile froze on her face as she waited for my acceptance speech. They were waiting for another act of gratitude. They were waiting for me to thank them. For this performance. For this lie. But I had other plans. My voice recorder was still safely hidden in the pocket of my dress. There are weeks of evidence inside. Their words, their plans, their betrayal. I looked around the room. The eyes of the guests were fixed on me. They didn't know. They also believed in the illusion Rachel had so carefully constructed. "I have something important to tell you all," I said. My voice was firm and even. Not a single tear, no uncertainty. No more shouting. No more pretending. Rachel froze. Her lips twitched, and she took a step forward. "Mom? Everything is fine." "What is it?" she asked, her voice sounding affectionate. "It's okay," I replied calmly. "I just think it's time for all of you to know the truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel's face turned the color of sour milk, and David looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Ignazio froze, his hands still resting on the laptop, his mouth slightly open in shock. Before anyone could recover from my statement, I slowly but confidently reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I squeezed it in my hand, feeling a tremor of tension run through my fingers. "I have proof of everything I said," I said in a flat voice and pressed play. Their voices poured out of the speaker. Alien, cold, and cruel. "It won't be long now. The old lady will give up soon. How much have you taken already?" David's voice sounded lazy, as if it was about something insignificant. 25,000. "It's nothing. Take more." Then a joke, like a poisoned needle. "Hey, is the deaf old lady still alive?" And laughter. Their laughter. A laugh that now sounded like mockery, like betrayal. The recording continued to play. One after another, their conversations rang out, greedy, contemptuous, and cruel. Every word, every disgusting comment, every petty and mean joke. Talking about money, about how easier it would be if I were not only deaf, but also blind. About how they were waiting for me to finally disappear from their lives. The room froze. I saw my friends covering their mouths with their hands in horror. Others looked at Rachel and her family with open disgust. I turned to Carlos, my cousin. A man who has been a lawyer for more than 30 years. His face was set in grim determination. "Carlos," I said calmly, "I'd like to use your services. I want to press charges against my daughter and her husband for elder abuse and financial fraud." Carlos stood up. His movements were slow, like a man who wasn't going to back down. "I'll be happy to help, Ariana." His voice was firm, tempered with anger. "And I'll do it for free." What they did was despicable. Rachel shuddered. Her face trembled with tears. "Mom, please," she began, her voice breaking. You misunderstood everything. You're taking everything out of context. It was a joke, just a joke. We didn't want to. We didn't think." But my eyes remained cold. "Get out of my house," I said softly but firmly. "Right now. Take your things and leave." The silence broke like a taut string. They left that night. Rachel was still crying, begging me to change my mind, but I didn't even look in her direction. David was silent, his face burning with humiliation and anger. Ignacio followed them with his head low, hiding behind his parents like a coward. Only Mimi remained. She came up to me and took my hand tightly. And she stayed. A week later, Rachel transferred all the stolen $25,000 back to my account. Every last penny. I suspect Carlos' threats of legal action have done the trick. I decided not to sue. Not because she forgave. No. I just wanted to completely erase them from my life. A trial would mean months, maybe years of proceedings, and I didn't want them to take up even more of my time. Instead, I went to my lawyer and changed my will. Rachel was crossed out. Officially. I made sure that all the relatives and friends knew about it, so that no one could say they hadn't been warned. No one reproached me. They heard the recordings. They knew the truth. As for Ignacio, I couldn't bring myself to forgive him. Yes, he was only 14. But 14 is not 6. This is the age when a person already understands what is good and what is bad. This is an age when you can't help but realize that wishing your grandmother dead is no joke. It's a cruelty that I couldn't justify. Many people have told me that I should be lenient, that teenagers can be violent. But I knew that some words, especially those, stay for life. And I couldn't forget them. But Mimi. My sweet Mimi. My saving grace. When she was accepted to Berkeley, I paid for her tuition in full. I wanted her to be free. Free from them, from their shadow, from their poison. She moved to a dorm, away from her parents. Now she comes to see me every weekend. We can talk for hours about her projects, her dreams, her future. She shows me her work, shares how she sees the world. I listen to her and think that if I only had her, that would be enough. Yesterday, I finally completed the drafting of a new will. Everything I have, the house, the bills, the savings, will all go to Mimi. Because she's the only one who's shown me true love. The only one who protected me, even when she thought I couldn't hear her. The only one who really deserves it. You know, it's funny. Rachel spent years scheming to get my money. Planned, deceived, lied. And all she had to do was be a decent person. To show at least a shadow of sincere love. If she was just a daughter that I could be proud of, she would have gotten everything anyway. But she chose the path of lying. Maybe I lost my daughter. But I've gained something more valuable. I found the truth. And in Mimi, I found the family I always dreamed of. A family based not on greed and deception, but on love. The real one. Clean. Genuine. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.